If you've ever felt like you're falling behind, like everyone else got a manual for life and you didn't, stay with me. This video isn't here to motivate you or sell you quick confidence. It's here to explain why your path feels different and why that difference may be the very thing that leads to your deepest success. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some people are rejected early but rise later, how Carl Jung's ideas reveal the hidden advantage of that path, and how to stop fighting your nature and start building a life that actually fits you. If you want more clarity, more inner peace, and a definition of success that doesn't cost you your soul, you're in the right place. Listen closely. This may explain more about your life than you expect. The Ones Who Fall Out of Step. October 1999. A quiet apartment at the edge of a city that never truly sleeps. The radiator clicks unevenly. Outside, traffic hums like a distant river. Inside, a young man sits at a small kitchen table long after midnight, staring at a notebook he hasn't written in for weeks. He isn't lazy. He isn't lost. He's thinking too deeply for a world that rewards speed over depth. People his age are already choosing lanes, careers hardening into titles, relationships locking into routines, certainty worn like a uniform. And yet, for him, something refuses to settle. Every time he tries to step fully into a role, it feels borrowed. Like a coat that fits the shoulders but tightens at the chest. He can perform well enough. He always has. But the performance drains him in a way he can't explain. This is the quiet beginning shared by a certain kind of person, not loud enough to be noticed, not dramatic enough to be rescued. Just a persistent sense that the script everyone else seems to understand is written in a language that doesn't quite translate. These are often the people who look behind in their 20s, not visibly failing, just out of rhythm. They drift between paths, not because they lack discipline, but because none of the obvious options feel honest. Friends tell them they're talented. Teachers say they have potential. Employers say they're capable. And yet, none of it lands. Compliments slide off like rain on glass. Inside, there's a growing suspicion that success, as it's being offered, comes at the cost of something essential. If this is you, you've probably noticed how early life favors adaptation. The ones who learn quickly what's expected, who read the room and mirror it back, who master the language of approval. These people are rewarded early, not because they're shallow, but because the system is designed to reinforce those who can synchronize with it. But there's another temperament, rarer, quieter, and far less efficient in the beginning. These individuals don't move comfortably in groups. They can socialize, but it costs them. Small talk feels transactional. Status games feel hollow. They sense undercurrents others ignore. The unspoken hierarchies, the emotional bargains, the subtle pressure to trade sincerity for acceptance. They're often described with vague labels: too intense, too sensitive, hard to read, sometimes even arrogant, despite being deeply self-critical. What's really happening is simpler and more painful. They're internally complex in an environment that prefers simplicity. Early on, this mismatch leads to friction. These people don't advance as smoothly. They hesitate where others charge ahead. They disappear for stretches, not because they don't care, but because their inner world demands sorting. While others accumulate experiences, they metabolize them. While others collect achievements, they wrestle with meaning. And the world rarely applauds that kind of labor. This is where misunderstanding begins. Families worry. Friends grow impatient. Advice arrives. Well-meaning but misaligned. Just pick something. You're overthinking? Everyone feels that way. Push through. And sometimes they try, they commit, they force themselves into trajectories that look right from the outside. For a while, it works. They achieve milestones. They gather evidence that they're doing life correctly. Then something breaks. Not loudly, not all at once, but subtly, persistently. Motivation drains. Anxiety hums beneath the surface. A strange numbness creeps in. An absence of excitement. Even when things are objectively going well, it feels like living in a house where the lights are on, but no one's home. This is often the moment when they start to believe something is wrong with them. But this stage is not pathology. It's initiation. Carl Jung observed this pattern long before it had language in popular culture. He noticed that certain individuals are structured for a different kind of development. one that prioritizes inner coherence over outer conformity. For them, life cannot be rushed without consequence. Their psyche resists shortcuts. When they try to live someone else's life, something inside pushes back. Early rejection is part of this pattern, not always overt, but felt, a sense of being slightly out of place everywhere, of watching others bond easily while you remain on the edge, observing, of being included, but not fully met. This rejection isn't punishment. It's information. It's life signaling that the usual formulas won't work here. And yet, there's a strange reversal hidden in this story, because while these individuals appear delayed early on, many of them undergo a profound shift later in life. In their 40s, sometimes even later, something stabilizes. The inner conflicts that once drained them begin to integrate. The parts they suppressed start working together instead of against each other. Decisions become cleaner. Energy returns, not as frantic ambition, but as grounded momentum. From the outside, it looks like sudden success. From the inside, it feels overdue. People begin to notice them then. They're sought out for insight, leadership, creativity, or vision, not because they chased recognition, but because their inner alignment has become visible. What once isolated them now differentiates them. What once slowed them now sustains them. This is the paradox Jung pointed toward. The personality that struggles early is often the one built for depth rather than speed. And depth, while inefficient at first, compounds over time. If you've ever felt like you're running on a different clock, like your life refuses to unfold on demand, this story may already feel uncomfortably familiar. What looks like delay may be preparation. What feels like exclusion may be protection. And what others mistake for failure may be the early cost of becoming something whole rather than merely successful. The mask that works too well. There comes a moment, usually in late adolescence or early adulthood, when this rare temperament learns a critical survival skill. If being fully honest creates friction, then adaptation becomes necessary, not as deception, but as translation, a way to function in a world that doesn't speak your inner language. Carl Jung called this adaptation the persona. The persona is not falsehood. It's a social instrument, a mask shaped by expectations, feedback, and subtle rewards. Everyone develops one. It's how you get through interviews, family gatherings, classrooms, and professional settings. Without it, society would be unbearable. The problem isn't wearing a mask. The problem is forgetting it's a mask. For the rare personality, the personas often becomes unusually refined because they've felt different for so long. They learn early how to smooth the edges, how to sound reasonable, how to appear calm, how to say the right thing without revealing too much. They become fluent in what works. From the outside, they look composed, intelligent, capable, even impressive. From the inside, there's a growing distance between who they appear to be and what they actually feel. This is a very specific kind of exhaustion, not the tiredness that comes from doing too much, but the fatigue that comes from constant self-editing, monitoring tone, adjusting reactions, filtering thoughts, living in a state of low-level performance at all times. You can succeed like this. Many do. You can get praised, promoted, admired, and still feel unreal. Jung observed that when the persona becomes over-identified with the self, the psyche begins to protest, quietly at first, a sense of restlessness, a feeling that something essential is missing. Then more insistently, anxiety, depression, loss of meaning, sudden aversion to paths that once felt promising. This is not weakness. It's the psyche demanding truth. Early success is particularly dangerous for this personality type. If you are rewarded for the mask, good grades, approval, recognition, you may build your entire identity around what is applauded rather than what is authentic. Over time, the inner world becomes neglected. The parts of you that don't fit the persona are pushed further underground, but they don't disappear. They wait. Often, the breaking point arrives when external success can no longer compensate for internal fragmentation. The job is fine. The relationship looks stable. Life, on paper, is working. And yet, something inside feels quietly suffocated. A sense of living someone else's life creeps in. You wake up already tired. You lose interest in goals you once chased desperately. This is the moment many people panic and try to fix the surface. A new career, a new relationship, a new identity. But for the rare personality, the issue isn't the outer structure. It's the inner split. Jung believed the psyche is self-regulating. When ignored too long, it creates symptoms, not to punish, but to correct. Anxiety becomes a signal. Numbness becomes information. Loss of motivation becomes resistance to a life that no longer aligns. This is why rejection often intensifies during this phase. When you begin to sense that the persona is no longer enough, you become less predictable. You hesitate to play roles that once came easily. You question things others accept without thought. You start withdrawing energy from performances that feel hollow. People notice. Some feel uncomfortable around you now, not because you've changed for the worse, but because you're no longer mirroring them. You're no longer reinforcing the shared illusion that everything is fine as long as it looks fine. And that discomfort is often projected back onto you. You're told you become difficult, distant, too serious, too introspective, sometimes even selfish, simply because you're no longer available to maintain the old dynamic. This is the cost of individuation. Jung described individuation as the long, often painful process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were conditioned to be. It's not self-improvement, it's self-recovery, and it rarely comes with applause in the beginning. For the rare type, this process often starts earlier than it does for others, but shows its rewards later. While peers build lives optimized for approval, you begin dismantling the false structures inside. While others collect achievements, you confront contradictions. While others reinforce identity, you dissolve it. From the outside, it looks like delay. From the inside, it feels like disintegration. But disintegration is not destruction, it's reorganization. The persona that once protected you has done its job. It helped you survive. But now it's too small to contain who you're becoming. And the psyche will not allow you to stay comfortable inside something that no longer fits. This is why the rare personality often experiences an identity crisis, while others seem settled. It's not because you're behind, it's because you're ahead. Working through layers, most people postpone until midlife forces them to. The exhaustion you feel is not failure. It's friction between who you were taught to be and who you actually are. And once that friction reaches a certain intensity, the journey inward becomes unavoidable. The shadow you had to leave behind. Every adaptation has a cost. When the persona becomes the primary interface with the world, something else moves into the background. Jung called it the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it exists outside the light of conscious approval. The shadow is made of everything you learn to hide in order to belong. For the rare personality, the shadow forms early. It forms the first time your intensity is met with discomfort. The first time your curiosity is labeled excessive. The first time your emotional depth feels like too much for the room. So you learn, you adjust, you tone it down, and whatever doesn't fit gets pushed away. Your anger, because it threatened harmony. Your ambition, because it made others uneasy. Your sensitivity, because it was misunderstood. Even your confidence, because it attracted projection. None of these parts were wrong. They were simply inconvenient. Jung emphasized that the psyche does not discard anything essential. What is rejected by the ego is stored in the unconscious. And over time, the shadow grows, not as a monster, but as a reservoir of unlived life. This is why the rare type often feels a strange inner tension, a sense of holding back without knowing exactly what's being restrained. You may feel smaller than you are, quieter than your true voice, as if a deeper version of you is pacing behind a locked door. In early life, suppressing the shadow can be adaptive. It helps you navigate family systems, schools, social hierarchies. You survive by becoming agreeable, capable, and non-threatening. But survival strategies have expiration dates. As adulthood progresses, the shadow begins to demand integration, not all at once, but through subtle signals, repeated patterns, emotional overreactions that don't match the situation. Sudden aversions to people or environments you once tolerated. You might find yourself inexplicably irritated by shallow conversations, drained after social interactions that used to be manageable, drawn to solitude, not out of avoidance, but necessity. This is not antisocial behavior. It's the psyche asking for space to reintroduce what was exiled. The rare personality often becomes aware of this earlier than others, while peers are still expanding outward, collecting roles, achievements, identities. You begin turning inward, not because you want to escape life, but because something inside you needs to be reclaimed. Jung warned that what remains unconscious does not stay passive. The shadow, when ignored, expresses itself indirectly, through self-sabotage, through chronic dissatisfaction, through choosing relationships and careers that mirror unresolved inner conflicts. You may notice repeating themes in your life, similar disappointments, familiar emotional dynamics, the same inner argument replaying with different characters. This isn't bad luck. It's a curriculum. The psyche repeats lessons until they are learned consciously. And for the rare type, the central lesson is usually this: stop abandoning parts of yourself to maintain external harmony. But this lesson is not easy. Integrating the shadow means risking disapproval. It means allowing your boundaries to become visible, your preferences to be felt, your voice to carry weight. It means disappointing people who benefited from your silence. This is where early rejection intensifies. As you begin to embody more of your truth, you become less controllable, less eager to please, less willing to play roles that cost you your integrity. Some people respond with distance, others with criticism, a few with outright hostility, not because you've become cruel, but because you've become whole. Psychologically, this is threatening. Your presence now reflects back what others are avoiding in themselves. Your refusal to self-betray disrupts the unspoken agreement that everyone should shrink equally to keep the system comfortable. So you are labeled again: too intense, too serious, too much. And this time, you feel it more deeply, not because you're weaker, but because you're closer to yourself. This is the paradox Jung understood. The path to inner wholeness often looks like outer fragmentation at first. Relationships shift, directions dissolve, certainty disappears, but something else begins to form underneath the confusion, a sense of inner alignment. When shadow elements are gradually integrated, when your anger becomes assertiveness, your sensitivity becomes discernment, your ambition becomes direction. You reclaim energy that was previously spent on suppression. Life begins to feel heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because you are more responsible for your choices. Lighter because you are no longer carrying the burden of pretense. This is not the phase where success announces itself. This is the phase where success is being built invisibly. While others are rewarded for fitting in, you are doing the quieter work of becoming congruent. And congruence does not produce immediate applause. It produces something more valuable: integrity. And integrity, once established, becomes a foundation that does not collapse when circumstances change. This is why the rare personality often appears to lag early, but accelerates later. Because when the shadow is integrated, your energy stops leaking into anxiety, overthinking, and internal conflict. You stop fighting yourself. And when that happens, momentum becomes natural, the inner clock that doesn't match the world. There is a quiet grief that comes from living on a different timeline, not because you're behind, but because the world insists you are. The rare personality feels this mismatch early. You sense that your growth is happening inward, while everyone else is accumulating outward proof: titles, relationships, certainty, a visible path forward. And while you may achieve some of these things, they don't settle inside you the way they seem to settle in others. Jung believed the psyche has its own rhythm, a natural unfolding that cannot be rushed without consequence. When this rhythm is ignored, symptoms emerge: restlessness, depression, a persistent feeling of living someone else's life. You might look functional on the outside while feeling internally disoriented, as if your soul is waiting for something the calendar cannot provide. This is not immaturity. It is misalignment. Modern culture rewards early specialization and quick definition. Choose a lane, brand yourself, commit fast, optimize. But the rare type is often still gathering pieces in their 20s and early 30s, not because they are indecisive, but because their inner structure is still forming. They are not collecting options. They are collecting truth. This process is slower because it requires listening, and listening requires silence. And silence often looks like stagnation to people who measure life by movement alone. Jung wrote that individuation cannot occur in a state of constant adaptation. There must be periods of withdrawal, moments when the external world recedes so the inner world can speak without interruption. This is why the rare type often experiences phases of retreat. They disappear socially. They reduce stimulation. They step away from paths that once made sense. From the outside, it looks like delay. From the inside, it feels like recalibration. These phases are not comfortable. They often come with doubt. You may question your competence, your worth, your future. You may compare yourself relentlessly to peers who seem to have arrived somewhere you can't yet access. But comparison is a distortion when timelines differ. The oak and the vine do not grow at the same speed, nor are they meant to. The vine spreads quickly, finding support wherever it can. The oak grows slowly, building density beneath the surface before it ever becomes impressive. The rare personality is more oak than vine, and this is where early rejection compounds the confusion. When your path doesn't produce visible results quickly, people begin to offer advice you didn't ask for, suggestions to be more practical, more realistic, more like everyone else. Their concern may be genuine, but it is filtered through a framework that does not apply to you. You feel this deeply, not as anger, but as a subtle erosion of trust in your own timing. You may attempt to override your intuition, push yourself into roles that promise stability, but drain your vitality. You try to synchronize with the world's clock. This rarely ends well. Your body resists. Motivation collapses. You become exhausted doing things that aren't technically difficult. You procrastinate not because you're lazy, but because something in you refuses to move in a direction that feels false. Jung saw this as the psyche's corrective function. When the conscious ego tries to force a path that contradicts the deeper self, the unconscious intervenes through symptoms, through loss of energy, through inner conflict. It's not sabotage, it's guidance. The problem is that guidance doesn't always feel kind. There is a period, often long, where you exist between identities. The old roles no longer fit, but the new ones aren't yet clear. This liminal space is psychologically demanding. There is no script, no applause, no external validation. Just a growing sense that something essential is being built. During this time, the rare personality often feels alone, not because they lack relationships, but because few people understand what they are becoming. Conversations feel shallow. Advice feels irrelevant. You begin to crave depth, meaning, resonance. This craving is not elitism. It is hunger for alignment. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. The inner fragmentation begins to resolve. You start recognizing patterns instead of being trapped in them. You feel more grounded in your choices, even when outcomes are uncertain. You stop seeking permission to exist as you are. This is the moment your internal clock starts to synchronize with your actions, not with society, with yourself. And once that happens, your growth accelerates, not chaotically, organically. You begin to move with clarity rather than urgency. You make fewer decisions, but they carry more weight. You invest your energy into fewer directions, but with greater depth. This is why late success often appears sudden, but it isn't. It is the visible result of years spent aligning the inner world before reshaping the outer one. When the mask cracks and the real work begins, there is a moment that arrives quietly, but once it does, nothing can return to how it was before. It often begins with exhaustion, not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from living too long in a shape that isn't yours. For the rare personality, this moment usually follows years of adaptation, years of being agreeable, competent, reasonable, impressive enough. You learned how to function. You learned how to succeed on paper. You learned how to be palatable. And then one day, the mask stops working. The persona, which once protected you, starts to suffocate you. Jung never said the persona was bad. He said it was necessary. A bridge between the inner world and society. The problem begins when the bridge becomes the house, when the role replaces the self. This is when symptoms intensify. Anxiety becomes more specific. Depression feels less chemical and more existential. You may wake up with a sense of dread that has no obvious cause, or you may feel numb, detached, watching your own life as if it belongs to someone else. This is not failure. This is initiation. The psyche is signaling that the cost of maintaining the false self has exceeded its benefits. What once earned approval now drains vitality. What once brought praise now brings emptiness. And this is where many people panic. They try to fix the feeling without changing the structure. New habits, new productivity systems, new relationships, more achievement, more distraction. But the rare type can't outrun this phase. Because the issue isn't behavior, it's identity. The cracking of the mask reveals the shadow, not as something dark or dangerous, but as something unfinished. The parts of you that were never allowed full expression begin to surface, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes angrily, sometimes through fantasies of escape or reinvention. You may feel impulses that don't fit your self-image, a desire to speak more bluntly, to set boundaries you once avoided, to pursue interests that don't make sense to others, to withdraw from roles that once defined you. This can feel destabilizing. You may worry that you're becoming selfish, or difficult, or unrecognizable. But what's actually happening is reintegration. The shadow is not the enemy of the self. It is the part that carries lost energy. Jung believed that whatever we repress does not disappear. It waits, and when it returns, it does so with force proportional to how long it was ignored. That force can feel disruptive. Relationships shift. Priorities change. Old ambitions lose their grip. You may grieve versions of yourself that once felt safer, but beneath that grief is relief. Because for the first time, you are no longer negotiating your existence. You are inhabiting it. This phase often coincides with early rejection becoming more explicit. People notice the change. You're less accommodating, less eager to please, less available for dynamics that depend on your self-erasure. Some respond with confusion, others with resistance, a few with withdrawal. This hurts, especially if you've built your identity around being reliable, supportive, or emotionally attuned to others. But rejection at this stage serves a different function than earlier rejection. Earlier rejection was about not fitting in. This rejection is about no longer pretending to. There is an important psychological shift here. You stop interpreting discomfort as danger. You begin to see it as information. Not every loss is a mistake. Not every conflict is a threat. Some are evidence that you are finally standing in your own center. And this is where the rare personality starts to gain something that cannot be taught early in life. Self-trust, not confidence in outcomes. Confidence in alignment. You begin to trust that even when things fall apart, you will not abandon yourself to make them work. You stop chasing environments that require you to fragment. You become selective, not out of fear, but out of respect for your energy. This inner solidity is subtle, but it changes everything. Your nervous system calms. Decision-making becomes simpler. You are less reactive because you are less divided. And slowly, the world responds. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. Opportunities arise that match who you are now, not who you pretended to be. People enter your life who recognize you without explanation. Work begins to feel like expression instead of performance. This is the paradox Jung understood deeply. The moment you stop trying to be acceptable, you become substantial, and substance lasts. If this video spoke to a part of you that's been quiet for a long time, this channel was made for you. Here, we explore depth, truth, and the parts of yourself that don't fit into easy boxes. Without pretending, without rushing, without masks. Subscribe if you're ready to stop performing and start living from the inside out. Your journey doesn't need to be louder. It needs to be truer.